Hey everybody, Joshua at TPC. I really appreciate when you guys make requests for videos that are going to be helpful to you. And a few of you made a request about diagnosing a reefer when it's not cooling or something's the matter with it. So for the cooling part of it, I wanted to make a video today. Obviously, with it not running is where your pre-trip's going to start, right? You're checking your oil, you're checking your coolant. On TKs, your upper belt up here is extremely vital that it's adjusted properly, because this spins your intake fan that's pulling the air through your condenser, which ultimately cools your reefer, or cools the 404A that cools your reefer. So this right here, if this belt is not efficiently tight, then that fan cannot be pulling the full amount of air possible through the condenser. So your unit's going to cool a lot slower. So making sure that your belts are adjusted properly is extremely important. So this one right here runs off of your crank, and it runs your gearbox, which ultimately turns the fan for your belt. So having these two adjusted is extremely important. Your alternator belt should always check that as well. Have a little bit of play in it. So over here you'll have a sight glass on your refrigerant reservoir, and you'll have a sight glass on your compressor oil reservoir. You should be able to see oil in this reservoir right here, especially when it's running. You'll see it splashing around in there. That is not refrigerant. That is oil for your compressor. If you do not see that, you have an issue. That means you have a seal leak right here at the compressor shaft, and that's going to need to get fixed so you don't burn up a compressor. Now over here, you may or may not see this little ball floating in here. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So this is not a good way to tell whether you have enough Freon in the system. So we're going to fire it up here in a second, and I'm going to show you by your gauges. Now the ultimate way you can tell is as soon as you fire the reefer up, both TKs and carriers will go through a 5-minute warm-up, and then they'll idle up. So after you go through that 5-minute warm-up period, if you're not feeling cold air coming out of that unit inside, you have an issue. Now the air may not feel as cold as it can be, and we'll kind of get into that of how fast it should start pulling down. So we're going to go ahead and fire this thing up, and I'll show you guys a few things. So I apologize about the noise. But a couple things that you're going to be looking for is you'll start to feel the temperature differences in your cold side versus your hot side. All right, your suction side versus your discharge side. So if you don't have Freon in the system, it's not going to be pulling anything or pushing anything, because there's nothing to pull and push. So these lines are basically going to stay at the temperature that they were when you fired it up. Now obviously if your motor's running and your reefer's not cooling, they'll get a little bit warmer, but you will feel the difference when they're working properly. You will have a hot side and you will have a cold side. And this right here, when it's running really good, you'll start to see frost build up on this. So we'll get her to fire up here real quick.
touch here. So it's that quick. One thing that you always want to check, you'll notice I have a zip tie right here. These little things, these little throttle controls, they like to come undone. So always make sure that this is attached on your Reefer. Alright, let's go down to the gauges. Alright. So from your instrument panel, it's going to give you your cooling temp, or your coolant, right? So this is your antifreeze. These are your gauges. Antifreeze level, oil pressure, oil level, amps. This is what the system's drawing. So basically it's pulling 5.1 amps to recharge the battery from sitting and starting. Battery voltage 14 is where you want it. RPMs on a 210 and a 230 are going to be right around here, and the same thing on the smaller carriers. Your 7500s or your bigger 330s, they're going to run at a little higher RPM. So discharge pressure. This should not be over 300. If your discharge pressure is too high, you have either too much Freon or not enough Freon in the system. Suction pressure. This should, I believe it should be running right around there. I don't remember what the high point is of where it's not working right, but your discharge pressure, that should never get over 300. Unless it's a really hot day and your Reefer's just struggling. But it shouldn't stay up above 300 long. EVT, electrical throttle valve position. You should see it fluctuate because it's controlling the flow of that Freon. We're going to exit out of here. Sensors. Okay, so your control return air, you should see this steadily start dropping. This Reefer's only been on for about 3 or 4 minutes. And you can see it steadily dropping the return air. That's the air that it's sucking in to the bottom of the unit inside from the trailer. Display should be right around the same. Controlled discharge. So this is the air that's being discharged into the trailer. You should instantly see this start to come down if your system is running properly. If it is not coming down, or it's coming down extremely slowly, you know you don't have enough Freon in the system, or your belt's loose, you're not pulling enough air, so you need to get it checked. Same. Temperature differential. So there is negative 11, 10 degrees difference between what I have this set at and the ambient temperature in the trailer right now. You should start to see this change as well if your pressures are right and your discharge pressure, your discharge temperature is correct. Evaporator coil temperature, this should automatically start to drop as well. And then there's the ambient air, so it's almost 80 degrees out here right now. So that's what you're looking for on your gauges if your trailer's cooling properly. Now, on a hot summer day with a 210 or a 212 or a 230, you should be able to pull from 80, 90 degrees down to 0 or in the negatives. That shouldn't be taking your unit any longer than at top 2 hours. And that's sitting still. If you're cruising down the road pre-cooling to where you're needing to get to, you should be able to be pulling down into the negatives, or at least 0, within about an hour, 45 minutes. So those are your tips on to make sure your Reefer's running right, if it's cooling right. Now you got to remember, you're going to be taking into factors of how hot it is outside, whether you got water in the insulation of your walls. So water saturation, that's going to make a huge difference on how quickly